How good is Denzel?
How good is Michael Jordan?
Three Films and a Podcast has no claim of ownership on any film footage used in this episode. All film footage is owned in its entirety by the copyright holders and is used solely with the intent of film criticism, commentary, and education under fair use law. And just like every car in Too Fast, Too Furious, this podcast contains spoilers. Enjoy.
Hi there. Welcome to Three Films and a Podcast. I'm Tyler Beck, coming to you from a quintessentially October Portland day up here, obviously in Portland, Oregon. And with me, as always, are the irreplaceable and immensely talented Ben Lawhorn and Matt Weiler, which without the two of them, honestly, this podcast wouldn't happen. So wherever this podcast finds you, I hope it finds you well, and you owe them a big round of applause and helping of thanks for bringing this to you. It quite literally couldn't happen without them. Again, this is
hold for applause.
Yeah, right. No, I mean it though. It's it genuinely, all the graphics you see and all the content you see wouldn't happen without you guys. So, I figured credit where credit is due, right?
Team effort.
We're Three Films and a Podcast, and the way this whole thing works is we go through new to us unseen movies in a series of rounds. So each round, one of us will pick a category, and then each of us will pick a movie that matches that category, and we will watch and we will discuss. And now we are bringing it to the whole world to see and to listen to here on our podcast. We're currently in round 9. We're discussing Spike Lee films. And this episode specifically is going to talk about Malcolm X, the 1992, right? 1992?
Sounds right. Yeah.
Yeah, it was right in my head. And then when I said it, I second guessed it. 1992 film by obviously Spike Lee. And like I said, it's round 9 for us. For you guys, this is still technically round 1 if you're listening to this podcast or watching it. And with that in mind, we came up with an idea to do what we're calling little podcasts, where we'll go back and we'll talk about the movies we've already seen. The discussions are a little bit shorter, but still, there's a lot of good movies we've watched that, we'd hate for you, the listener, to miss out on. So with that in mind, we've got an episode recorded where we talked about our very first round, where we watched Dunkirk, The Last Black Man in San Francisco, and The Farewell. If you haven't seen either of or any of those movies, I'd recommend checking them out. And then keep an eye on your podcast feed for the three films and a little pod episode discussing the 3 of them. We're also going to use that format to do a bunch of other fun stuff, like the Halloween episode we've got coming up that was determined by a vote on our Instagram feed. If you didn't see that and you'd like to participate in those sorts of things, give us a follow and be a part of this movie club. Without further ado, I think it's time we start talking about the movie that we're all here to talk about, which is, again, Malcolm X. And I'm going to let Ben set that up because I've talked for far enough.
Time to pass the mic.
Yeah.
So 1992's Spike Lee film Malcolm X. I'll kind of give you the IMDb description so you guys know what it's about if the title isn't giving it away. It is the biographical epic of the controversial and influential black nationalist leader, from his early life and career as a small-time gangster to his ministry as a member of the Nation of Islam. And I think this is such a wonderful film. I think we really get to see a lot of Malcolm X, essentially through adulthood, from where he starts as a small-time crook to him becoming a leader, and obviously ultimately ending with his demise. I'll just go over briefly my Letterboxd review, just as a reminder to everybody that listens. We're keeping track of all the films that we watch in our Letterboxd. It's a great community where people can go in there and talk about the films that they like, what they've been watching, and just kind of interact with each other to go over, just the general thoughts of every movie. So I'm just going to read mine real quick. Not too quick. It's a little long, but I've had trouble putting what's in my head into words for this movie, but after a couple conversations, I think I can accurately share my perspective. First off, this movie is very powerful and goes to great lengths to tell as much of Malcolm X's story as possible. However, I often found myself distracted by the filmmaking. If you asked me to give you a period piece drama that looked like it used the same lenses as early real-world intros, Malcolm X would be it. Spike Lee is a fantastic director. Having just watched Do the Right Thing, his fingerprints are all over the style of that movie, but they're also all over Malcolm X. And it didn't work for me as well this time. I don't want a fisheye lens, super wide shot while Malcolm flattens his hair. That's too much for me, and I'm aware so much of this is personal perspective and preference, but that's all I have. The storytelling was wonderful. I really felt like we got to see both the good and bad sides of Malcolm X and the groups he was involved with. The cast is superb. I can't believe Denzel lost out on the Oscar to Al Pacino for Scent of a Woman. Hooah! But this performance will pass the test of time. We are definitely going to dive into that later on. I never want to advocate for remaking classic movies, but I will say that I think a modern-day limited series on Malcolm X would work so well. This movie is almost 3.5 hours long. There was so much that got jammed into it, and I just feel like it could have been extended and just given to us in 6 or 8 episodes for an hour long each. I think that there's definitely enough material there for us to talk about. Overall, I'm very happy I got around to watching this. Seeing the runtime initially kind of scared me off a little bit, but you have to have a certain mind frame when you're going into something like this. Like, it's a commitment. I know I felt that way the first time. I think it was, is it There Will Be Blood? I think it's like 3 hours long or something. I was like, I've heard great things about this, but this is a very long movie. But
I drink your milkshake. I drink it up.
I think Malcolm X did a great job of keeping me involved. I was interested the whole time. We get to see so many different aspects of his life, and I think Spike Lee just did a wonderful job kind of showing us all of that. So, and then I just ended with what is my favorite quote from the whole movie. Such a strong performance from Denzel, and I think it just kind of hits so hard when he talks about, we didn't land on Plymouth Rock. Plymouth Rock landed on us.
See, these are the questions. These are the questions you and I have to ask. How did we get this mind? You're not an American. You're an African who happens to be in America. You have to understand the difference. We didn't come over on the Nita, the Pinta, and the whatchamacallit. We didn't land on Plymouth Rock. Plymouth Rock landed on us. Landed right on top of us.
I think that's just a great summation of what the movie is about. And yeah, I don't know. I thought this was a fantastic movie.
Yeah, for sure. Before we started recording, I talked about wanting to just go through our Letterboxd reviews one after another, but there's a few things that you touched on that I kind of wanted to expand upon right now while I was thinking about it. And one, I was actually surprised to see that, maybe not surprised, it just didn't occur to me that it could work as sort of like a long mini series or something. Because for me, honestly, like after I watched it, I was thinking about if it were to be remade now, who would direct it, or who would be Malcolm X, and which of today's actors. And I thought about prompting you guys and asking you to think about that before the episode. But for me, honestly, I just was like, I don't think it needs it. And I'm not saying you necessarily think it needs it either. Yeah. The thought never even occurred to me that it could be anything other than what it is, or that it could be remade. And not that I think you're wrong. It just was like, I just didn't think about it. And I do think you're right. It would be cool to see it maybe a little bit longer so we could get a little more detail and in-depth, conversation about it. But that was just something that jumped out from your review for me.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of the times with movies, and I think we talked about this with 25th Hour, where there's times where you finish something, it's like, man, I feel like they could have chopped off 15 minutes, 20 minutes, and it just would have been great. Shit. And I feel like this is one of the rare opportunities, or one of the rare movies where going the opposite direction really would have done it. I don't know. It just would have made it great. I think, it's 3.5 hours long, which is insane, but it's like, cool, double that, chop it up for me. Like, let me watch 7 1-hour segments, because I'm into it. Like, I'm super into it.
Yeah.
I think as far as recasting, the obvious and super easy choice, given the recent viewing of Tenet and Black Klansman and stuff, would be John David Washington. Like, he would be fantastic. I'd actually kind of like to see him fill his dad's shoes, and kind of see how he takes on that role. But like I said in the Letterboxd, I'm usually not someone who's on board with a remake or anything like that, but this is one of the few times I'm like, I feel like this film is a masterpiece and it shouldn't be touched big butts. Like, I wouldn't be upset with like just a limited miniseries on Malcolm X. Go into it some more for me.
I do think that that's one type of remake that I think can usually get a pass, is one like you're describing, where it's not just remaking a movie, it's turning it into like a different format. Mm-hmm. So it's not the exact same thing. And I do think I'd like to see it. Although if I never saw it, I wouldn't be disappointed because I thought this movie was great. But
yeah.
I thought I had something else I wanted to touch on from your review, but I can't remember right now. So I think we can just move on and Matt can take over from there.
Cool. I mean, just to, I guess, advocate for this to be made into a series, reading through Tyler's review here, which I'll share in a second, is just the lack of exposure that a figure like Malcolm X gets to the white community. I think his story is pretty well known, in the black community. But yeah, let me read Tyler's review of it on Letterboxd, and I'll do my best to do Tyler's voice justice.
Don't do
wait.
that. No one. Wait. one is enough. 1 minute is plenty.
This is Tyler in Portland. His review starts off. I put off writing this review for a while because it took me a while to understand how truly I felt about this film. To be clear, I really liked it. I just needed to think about it for a while. In the end, what it comes down to is this. This movie made me realize, as a white guy, how disconnected my understanding of the black community and their struggle is. Just how much of a struggle it must have been and continues to be to coexist with their white neighbors. There's a quote floating around from Joe Biden where he says, "I think about what it takes for a black person to love America." And to me, that's what this movie is all about. When I think about this movie, I think of it less about the story of Malcolm X and more about the story of angry, disillusioned African Americans trying to reconcile their existence in a society that, by and large, couldn't really care less about them. I mean, growing up, I never heard much about Malcolm X, other than that he was sort of the yin to MLK's yang, the extremist, the dangerous separatist, the other side of the civil rights leader coin, so to speak. But what I didn't understand, or frankly, embarrassingly, never even thought to try and understand, is why that point of view even existed. Malcolm X's ideas were radical. They incited violence and unrest, and in the end, his ideas killed him. But despite all of that, his voice was necessary. Sometimes you have to make some noise if you want people to hear you. Ultimately, if I'm being honest, I still lean towards Dr. King's approach, as I feel that violence and separatism can only breed more violence and separatism. But after watching this film, I feel I have a better understanding of why Malcolm X felt the way he felt and why he means so much to the black community. As for the filmmaking, I didn't personally feel as though the Spikeisms in this movie were too much. In fact, I felt they were quite appropriate, and frankly, I didn't even notice them. Denzel is incredible, and Angela Bassett is really, really great. Overall, I'd highly recommend.
Those are my thoughts. And I typed that up. I typed that up this morning before we recorded because, like I said, it really was difficult for me to write the review because I wasn't totally sure, other than the fact I was like, yeah, it was good. I'm glad I watched it. I think everyone should watch it. I really wanted to, think about why I felt that way. And I think obviously that's what I wrote. So that's what I think. But it was not difficult for me to write the review, but it was just difficult for me to think about why I wanted to write it.
Yeah. I mean, I think, and my review is very similar in that, there just felt like so much, and you're right, like it's about Malcolm X, but there's just like so much there to experience. And there's like different experiences. Like you have to watch the whole thing because if you stop midway, then you're missing like what the movie's about. Like there's no point. You have to complete the journey.
Right.
Yeah. And I thought that was interesting. Moving on to my review. If you were to ask me about the man Malcolm X, I would have told you that he was an extremist, a racist, a dangerous voice that led his following through militancy and violence. In other words, the counter-argument to MLK's methods. That assessment would have been at best misleading and out of context. That is the nature of black history in the United States. The movie did a good job of showing everything. It gave context to his upbringing, his conversion, his philosophy, and his evolution. It showed why people, especially white, would draw those conclusions and cling to the more outrageous details of his legacy. It also shows why his thought and activism is revered. I can at least give a more informed perspective when talking about him. As far as the movie goes, by the time I had started watching and remembering movies, Denzel was already Denzel, and he was cast in the movies to be Denzel, which isn't a negative. I love Denzel. But in the movie, he is Malcolm X. It made sense that after roles like this and in Glory, he became a star for the next decade. Though I've said before that John David Washington is still the greatest thing Denzel has ever done. It was great to see him in this. And holy Angela Bassett, I've loved her work and everything I've seen her do. I love the emotional weight she brought. As always, it was fun to see the Spike Lee-isms put into his films, as well as some of his usual lineup making appearances. What a joint.
Yeah, I was surprised, maybe not surprised, I don't know. The reason we're, a club, maybe not the reason we're a club, but one of the reasons I appreciate doing this with you guys is because we do share a lot of the same thoughts and feelings. But I thought it was interesting how all of our reviews were sort of the same, but they did have their differences. Like for Matt and I, the Spike-isms didn't bother us as much as it seems like they bothered Ben. Mm-hmm. And like I put in my review, I honestly didn't even notice them. In fact, to me watching it, I mean, it was very hyper stylized, and it definitely had a certain tone to it and a certain way about it. But to me, it didn't scream Spike Lee. I don't know if I didn't know it was a Spike movie and he wasn't in it for a lot of it. I don't know if I would have necessarily guessed it was a Spike Lee movie, which I thought was kind of weird. His touch didn't, in my opinion, didn't overwhelm the story. But I think it's interesting that it did for you. And I don't know. I just think it's cool that despite having similar takes on it, there were some differences like that.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to kind of see what sticks out to us and what doesn't. I think for me, I don't know, for some reason just really stuck out to me, like the vibrancy of the colors and just, I mean, it really was kind of the camera angles and things along those lines. And maybe it was because I had watched, 25th Hour, and that, for me, that was an example of like, I have no idea this is a Spike Lee movie until that tracking dolly shot, Philip Seymour Hoffman. Like, if that shot isn't in there, I don't know who that movie belongs to in the nicest way possible. You know what I mean? There's no like characteristic Spike shots in it. Whereas this one, I was like, okay, yes, this is definitely early Spike Lee movie. But it's great though. You know what I mean? Like that's also kind of what makes it what it is. Like the costumes are great. He's worked a long time with Ruth Carter, who won the Oscar for Black Panther for costume design. Like
Spike Lee, thank you for my start. I hope this makes you proud. Marvel may have created the first black superhero, but through costume design, we turned him into an African king.
I think they work together on Do the Right Thing. Like, yeah, I don't know that, like, I mean, outside of Do the Right Thing and even sometimes in that, I don't know that I love Spike Lee as an actor. I mean, there's probably more similarities than there should be, but it's kind of like Quentin putting himself in movies. And like, I feel like you didn't need to do this. Like, this could have been somebody else, but like.
I don't need you to tell me how fucking good my coffee is, okay? I'm the one who buys it. I know how good it is. When Bonnie goes shopping, she buys shit. I buy the gourmet expensive stuff because when I drink it, I want to taste it. But you know what's on my mind right now? It ain't the coffee in my kitchen.
Whatever, this is your movie, you can do what you want. Not to say that he's bad, but just like that's also probably one of the things I'm like, oh yeah, that's Spike who just wanted to hang out with Denzel, which is fine. If I had a Denzel in my movie, I would put myself in the movie too. I don't begrudge him that. It's just like, okay, like come on, But I mean, speaking of Denzel, like to your point, Matt, I think for the three of us anyway, like he's just always been Denzel. He's like one of the one name people. Like, yep, it's gonna be good if he's in it, whatever. But it's interesting that I think this was really his breakout performance, So for the people who saw it at the time, I mean, he had been doing St. Elsewhere on TV, which was obviously popular. He had done, was it Mo Better Blues, I believe, with Spike. So this is their second time that they've worked together. But I really feel like this kind of set him off. I'm sure I'm downplaying how huge Glory was at the time. I don't know that I have a great association with that movie because it's just like a school movie that they would put on when they didn't want to teach us. So I don't remember a ton about it, but I really feel like Malcolm really just kind of put him on the scene, so to speak. And I just still think it's like one of the best performances he's ever given in his entire life. And for the second time this episode, I'm just going to say how mad I am that Al Pacino won for Scent of a Woman over Denzel and Malcolm X.
Hoo-ah!
That is insane to me, but yeah.
Oh man.
Not to step on the Denzel conversation, but I think there's plenty of time to talk about Denzel.
Yeah.
Something you just said just hit me like a ton of bricks, and I can't believe how appropriate it is. Well, unfortunately appropriate it is to what we're talking about. Where I had the same experience with Glory that you did, in that it was thrown on the TV when teachers didn't feel like teaching us. Mm-hmm. And that is such an incredible representation of why I feel like a movie like this is so important. Yeah. Because no one ever took the time in my life growing up to teach me about the plight of the African-American person in America. Yeah. And the fact that a movie like Glory is just something that they throw at us when they don't feel like doing anything else. It's like an afterthought and something that's not important to them. I'd never thought about it that way. And hearing you say that out loud was shocking and striking. And it really it touches on pretty much what I think all of us said in our reviews, where it's just, I completely misunderstood Malcolm X. And, granted, I think from what I know, the movie did a good job of staying true to the actual story of Malcolm X. I'm sure there's some liberties taken. I know that, there's characters in the movie that didn't exist in real life and that sort of thing. But the importance of it and all that, it's kind of spinning my head right now.
Yeah, I feel like it did a good job kind of showing both sides of him, of Malcolm X. It's just like, yeah, I don't know. I think there's a movie out there, a bad movie out there that just kind of like glosses over the bad things that he did. The whole first hour of the movie is like him stealing, him sleeping with white women, which at the time obviously was a huge deal, all that kind of stuff. It's like there's a movie that just kind of talks about him as the leader, and I think we see those kind of biopics a lot. I thought about that with, off the top of my head, like Straight Outta Compton, like they do not address any of like Dr. Dre's like domestic abuse problems at all. But it's like, yeah, he's an executive producer. They're not going to talk about that, And just kind of sugarcoating even Bohemian Rhapsody. It's like, I don't know. There's just so many things that happen in biopics where it's just kind of like sugarcoated and glossed over. And I'm sure this Malcolm X still did that a little bit, but I think for the most part, it was pretty honest about who he was. And unfortunately, like we've all been saying, this is probably where I've learned the most about him as a person. I think we all know about Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King from school, but that's kind of where a lot of that just like ends off for us. So it's nice, even if it isn't a narrative kind of format, to get a little exposure to some of the other important. I don't know how to finish that off.
Jumping off of what both you and Tyler said, like I feel like our school Black history consisted of watching Glory and watching Roots. I can't even recall like a history teacher talking about any of that stuff. It's like, watch this. Yes, it was bad. Like, I think we just collectively knew that like slavery was bad, but no one like really like openly condemned it or talked about it. Mm-hmm. So that was interesting. And then like with Malcolm X, like once you're like about halfway through the movie and you're hearing some of the things that he's saying and you're listening to his philosophy and you're like, okay, I can see why like white people had a problem with him. I could see why like his tactics were problematic. But then like you finish the movie and you're like, whoa, wait a second. Like I never heard this part of his story. Like I didn't hear him come all the way around and like basically condemn everything that he had been about before, you know?
Yeah. His capacity to, at least from what we've been shown and the limited knowledge that I have about it, his ability to learn and grow and change and adapt is something that I think needs to be talked about more, because like we've all said, I didn't know him that way. I just knew him as, it's words that I even hate coming out of my mouth, but as like the angry black guy. You know what I mean?
You've been had. You've been took.
You've been hoodwinked, bamboozled, led astray, run amok. This is what he does.
It's embarrassing. It truly is, because I think, I mean, the story itself is incredible. I had no idea like I knew he came from Omaha and I knew he came from poverty. But I mean, as sad as it is to say, like, that's not something that's terribly surprising for the story of any black person in America, really.
Yeah.
So, but I didn't know his roots as a hustler. I didn't know any of that stuff. Just seeing his overall progression from, his young life to where it ultimately ends was surprising to me. And I was really glad to have seen it. And I think it just kind of speaks to a line from The Last Black Man in San Francisco. I know it stuck out to both of you. I think it was in Matt's Letterboxd review, where it just says, we're not just one thing, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's cool that Malcolm goes through life believing that everybody is just one thing and that there should be some separation, to ending up to where he doesn't necessarily think that way. And I think that point and that discussion gets lost completely, because I mean, frankly, I don't think any three of us had any idea that that's truly who he was, a person that thought deeply. I think, we all knew he was an intellectual, but he truly thought deeply, and he truly cared, and he truly listened, and he truly was trying to do what he thought was best. And I think I'm just glad that we were able to see it. As far as the movie itself is concerned, I think it might be, I don't know, I took some notes as I was watching it. I'm sure you guys did too. The way that it opened, I just wrote like the burning flag, the speech over the burning flag. To me, it was just like, okay, that's like, I think it was the perfect opening to this movie, because it was going to challenge everything that I thought. My perspective, I thought it was a direct challenge to like the white American perspective.
I'm taking you over there to help me build America. Being born here does not make you an American. I'm not an American, you're not an American. You're one of the 22 million black people who are the victims of America. You and I, we've never seen any democracy down there. No, we've never seen democracy. All we've seen is hypocrisy. We don't see any American dream. We've experienced only the American nightmare.
I thought that was a really brave, bold opening statement. And I thought it was clear from the very start that this movie was for black people. Like, it was something for them to be proud of. It was something that was for them to have and to hold. It was a movie for them. Like, we as white people have every movie. We've got all our heroes, and we've got all the Supermans and all the everything. But like, this was a movie that was made for them. And if white people could learn from it and enjoy it, then that's great. But it wasn't for us. My thought sort of changed towards the end of it to where I am now, to where it was just a good lesson. And it was something that it was for everyone. But I really appreciated that it challenged me straight out of the gate. I'm curious what was your first impressions when the movie started?
Yeah, I mean, I felt similarly. And like I've said, I feel like if you stop this movie midway, you've missed the experience. And not that you'd ever do that anyways with a movie, but like it's a transformation story. And so to see him, and it also just shows like to his character, like he was never a blind follower. He would learn new things and he would follow new things. But when new information was presented to him and things were exposed, like he evolved from that, and he just continued to evolve up until he died, basically. And that's something that isn't talked about. And so I agree. I had a similar sentiment. I'm watching this and I'm hearing like sort of the dialogue that he's talking about, especially in reference to white people. And honestly, like we hear some of that today still. And it's one of those things where like, well, if you're guilty of it, then you'll take offense to it. But if you're not guilty of it, then it's not going to bother you. And I do agree with that sentiment, but I could see why like a white audience would maybe take offense to some of the things being said. the filmmaking like didn't seem to apologize for that, based off the feelings that I was feeling at least. And then it does, like, as he goes to Mecca, he converts to, I guess, true Islam, and you see like his resolve soften, his philosophy expand, and he comes back to the United States like a completely changed person, ready to approach things in a very different way.
Are you prepared now to work with some of the other leaders of some of the other civil rights organizations?
Yes, we're prepared to work with any groups, leaders, organizations, as long as they're genuinely interested in results, positive results.
I agree. Like, it starts off feeling like this maybe isn't for me. Maybe this is way cool to see. Like, I love seeing things that is written and made for Black people, because it gives me a little bit of insight in their world and what they experience. But by the end, it was like, man, everyone needs to watch this. Like, we have a historical figure that we know nothing about, and the only reason we don't know anything about it is because we've chosen not to care about him as a historical figure.
Yeah, it's true. I think it hit back on what we talked about with our education growing up. I think we kind of got the version of like MLK was a great person, the Civil Rights Act was put into law, and racism was over, you know? And it's like, well, fast forward 25 years, like, no, that's not the case at all. You know, it's like, that's not how this happened. I think this movie really, I don't know if I had to break it down in simplest terms, like, it's a movie about personal growth, and that's what we get to see for 3.5 hours, which is fantastic. And as far as like who the audience is, I'm going to play the clip here of what I'm talking about, because I know I'm not going to summarize it well, but I do remember in the Oscars a few years ago, I believe they had, kind of a montage going on, and Kumail Nanjiani spoke, and he said something along the lines like, I grew up watching movies starring white guys my whole life, and I loved them, and I was able to see myself in them. And I don't think it's a horrible thing to ask you to do the same for me.
Some of my favorite movies are movies by straight white dudes about straight white dudes. Now straight white dudes can watch movies starring me, and you relate to that. It's not that hard. I've done it my whole life.
Well, I don't think we think about that. I grew up and I was like, oh yeah, all the actors are white. This is a story for me. It was like, then we get to see something with someone with a different background. It's like, yeah, you can still relate to these people. Like you can still find, I guess, the empathy and just the connection with them, even though you guys aren't going through the same exact thing. And I think that's what this movie does really well. It's like the three of us have been so privileged and never had to experience anything like we see in this movie, but I still think we're able to learn from it and take something away from it. And that's what it's for. I know Spike, when the movie was coming out, initially had a different director. His name was Norman Jewison, and he had done, big movies. He had done like Moonstruck and In the Heat of the Night. Like, he had done some great films, but there was just the pressure, and Spike said, like, this Malcolm X needs to be directed by a Black director.
I don't feel that a Caucasian director could do justice to this project, to this film. And I'm not saying that only Black people can direct Black projects and only white directors can direct white projects, but in particular matter, specific case, it's called for. No one can tell me that The Godfather was not enhanced by Francis Ford Coppola being Italian-American. He had nuances that nobody that wasn't Italian-American have gotten. The same thing with Scorsese, with Mean Streets, Goodfellas, and Raging Bull. And I think this is along the same lines. You needed an African-American, a capable African-American director.
Like, not that he wouldn't do a fine job, but just like the nuances, the history of it, like, he doesn't have it. Like, he's a white guy and needs to have a Black director. And so he left the film. Spike Lee was hired on, and here we are. And I do think it's the right choice. I don't think necessarily that people can't tell other people's stories, but if you get someone who's close to the source material, they deserve the opportunity to tell that story. And I think this is a great example of that.
Yeah, for sure. I can't imagine, like, one of the scenes that really stuck out to me in the beginning, and it really helps set up not only just Malcolm X's character, but the plight of a Black man or a Black child in that time, and maybe, probably even today, not even probably, is when he's in class talking to the teacher. And despite the fact that he's, at the top of his class and all the grades and every other performance metric, the teacher straight up calls him the N-word to his face and tells him that he can't be a lawyer. He should be, a carpenter or whatever, someone that works with his hands.
Now, I want you to think about something that you can be. You're good with your hands, making things. People would give you work. I would myself. Why don't you become a carpenter? That's a good profession for a colored. Wasn't your pa a carpenter? Jesus was a carpenter.
To me, there's no way maybe it was written into the movie, but that scene's very different if it's a white guy directing. I can't imagine it would have been as raw and as harsh as it was. And I think a scene like that is extremely important for someone like me to understand, like, what it means to be a black person in this country, especially then. Obviously, things aren't that much better, but just the uphill battle and just the institutionalized racism and how casual and how normal it is and how, I can't imagine the movie would have been the same had it been just some white guy.
For sure.
One thing that Spike does amazing in all of his movies was the way he portrays the world that we're going to be living in for, in this case, 3.5 hours. But he really does make a place feel lived in and make it feel real. Mm-hmm. And the shots in the beginning parts of the movie were just, I thought they were so cool. Like, it's hard to, it seems like it's archival footage, like restored somehow, you know what I mean? Like, and it seemed so vibrant. It seemed so cool. And it seemed like such a different world. And there was a moment where he's a waiter on the train, and they're in the back listening to the boxing match. And then he's got to go out and serve these racist white guys. And, he puts on the whole song and dance and, oh, yes, sir, master, all that shit. And then it cuts directly to a shot of him in Harlem, and just the juxtaposition of the two worlds that he's living in. It made me really realize, like, how important that neighborhood is to the black community. And just, I don't know, it just struck. It was one of the scenes that really jumped out to me. Just the straight up juxtaposition of the comfort and privilege of white America. And then as beautiful as it is that there is a community like that, there's only one place really for a black person to be a black person. And that was in Harlem. And I thought it was really cool to be able to see that. I mean, it's not cool, but you know what I mean? Like, no, I think it's important that we get to see that and how important it is to them and how they interact with it. And I was curious if you guys had any other, like, Matt, did you have any thoughts similar to that or any other juxtapositions that jumped out to you? Or?
I mean, just as we've been talking, there's that scene where they're in prison and Jackie Robinson joins the Dodgers, and like everyone in the prison just like super stoked. Like, it's big news and like everyone's like super excited, like you'd imagine they should be. And the guy that's sort of converting him over to Islam was like, what are you celebrating?
Didn't you hear? No, what happened? The Brooklyn Dodgers brought up Jackie Robinson, and we're pounding the hell out of them celebrating. Yeah, that's all right.
Sure. White man throw us a bone and we're supposed to forget 400 years of oppression.
Like, yeah, that's cool, but that's like, it's really meaningless. And I think about today, with all the ridicule, especially here in Utah, as embarrassing as it is, that like you have the NBA bubble, you have these, I mean, we're lucky enough to see like athletes of all different backgrounds, skin color, in the NBA and the MLB, NFL, like we have it all. But in the NBA bubble, when it becomes like an opportunity to use that platform as to speak for, like, on behalf of Black Lives Matter and raise awareness, you have all these fans like tweeting in about how they're not supporting the NBA anymore, how they don't want to do this. It's like, and it just like, it holds true back to that scene where it's like, really, like, at the end of the day, it's great, that we do have the diversity, that we do have, Black Americans with that platform that are pro athletes, but the pro athlete side of things is not representative of their experience here in America.
Yeah.
And so, like, yes, Jackie Robinson made it to the MLB, but that's not helping. Like, it's helping more people like him reach that level in athletics, but it's not really showing the black experience for what they're facing every day. And to hear some of these people like, well, what are these guys crying about? They make millions of dollars. It's like, well, they're crying about because this isn't representative of where they came from. Like,
right.
A lot of
they
these
didn't always make millions of dollars.
Right, yeah, a lot of these came from like single families, poverty-stricken neighborhoods, bad schools. Like, these guys got out of a bad situation.
Right.
So that's what I was reminded of.
Yeah, it's kind of the voice for the voiceless situation where they're, lucky enough to have the success that they do, which is great. I mean, for anybody, that'd be amazing. Like, but they don't forget where they came from, so to speak, and it's the same, even with white actors, but you got these people who refer to them as coastal elites. It's like so many of these people are just from the Midwest, though. They just live there now, people aren't just born and raised in LA and New York City and never leave, it's just like they still have family members who are suffering from not the privilege that the rest of us have, so it's, you use your platform for good, and it's frustrating, just to hear people say like, oh, just like stick to sports, or what was it, shut up and dribble? Is that what was it? Laura Ingraham that said that to LeBron? It's just like, no, that's not fair. Like, people are able to use their platforms for their own purposes, and
it's beyond not fair. I didn't mean to cut you off, but it's
you're right. Yeah.
The it's not just that it's unfair. Like, it is unfair, but like the level of hypocrisy of someone using their platform to sell someone else that they can't use their platform is fucking mind blowing. And it's something that I've always thought about. Like someone, like, there's people on my Facebook timeline or whatever that will go on there and they'll be critical of the Black Lives Matter movement or whatever. And that's all fine. But if, like, you can have your opinions and I'll talk to you about them, and I'll still, these are still people in my life that I love and respect. But the second that you use your platform to tell someone else that you don't agree with them using their platform, it's just like, it's a level of hypocrisy that I can't even reconcile. I can't comprehend it, because it makes literally no sense. It's fucking unbelievable.
Yeah, no, I agree with you 100%. And I will say that I just think in the past, I don't know, few years, my unfollow button's gotten more use than it ever has on Facebook. Just I'm like, not that I don't feel like you can't have this opinion, but like for my own mental health, like I just don't need to see some of these thoughts that people have. It's frustrating.
I actually have the opposite approach. I specifically don't unfollow them, because I feel like I need to remind myself that point of view exists. And I genuinely feel like I've struggled with this, man. I've gone like toe to toe arguing with people that didn't agree with me, and it never got anywhere. I never changed my mind. They never changed their mind. So like, I feel it's my responsibility to figure out a way that I can understand their perspective as much as I can and try to talk to them. And I feel like I don't want to be in my own little happy bubble where everything seems to be fine. So I purposely keep those people on there, and I understand, like, it's definitely a drain mentally, but I'm not advocating for you to do one thing or the other, but it's just like, for me personally, it's almost like my own little punishment. I will say I don't go on Facebook very much anymore because of that, but it is something I'm like, I feel like I need to know that it's still there.
That's totally fair. I understand that.
I can see it's a valid strategy to just get rid of them, but you can either do that or just don't go on Facebook like me.
Yeah, win-win. Yeah.
Just check in every now and then to remind yourself how ugly the world can be.
Yeah, I think the turning point for me was what I felt was just like dictating or just like researching this great response and just explaining why their viewpoint was maybe not entirely accurate. And, you get the nerves of like hitting send and like, I don't want to offend anybody, whatever. And just later on, they just respond LOL. I'm like, okay, this is insane. Why am I putting myself through this? Right. So I understand completely. I'm just like, I'm taking the coward's way out, I guess. And just like, I'm done with it. So,
I mean, and to be honest, like, maybe that's because, you just alluded to it. I mentioned it. No one changes their mind. Like, someone's not going to convince me that like, oh, actually Trump is great for the country. Like, and our listeners that maybe like Trump, that's fine. I really don't care. because at the end of the day, like, we both just want the same thing. We want what's best for ourselves and hopefully what's best for our community. But it's just, it gets frustrating being open-minded and just meeting closed-minded conversation.
Yeah.
So maybe it's better to just get rid of everyone and live in a bubble. I really don't know. But I want to kind of get back into the movie a little bit more. And I had thought about doing this towards the end of the pod, but we're kind of in it. I just mentioned the scene from the train to the streets of Harlem being one of my favorite scenes. I'm curious, Matt, if you have any scenes that stuck out to you that you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, it's a 3-hour movie, so like, I mean, there's a lot of good stuff in there, but one that I keep going back to, and maybe it's just because I'm a John David Washington fan, but like, I really love the ending where they kind of have their Dead Poet Society moment saying, "I am Malcolm X."
Yeah.
Which I feel like had a very similar impact, like as I was watching it.
May 19th, we celebrate Malcolm X's birthday because he was a great, great Afro-American. And Malcolm X is you, all of you. And you are Malcolm X.
I'm Malcolm X. I'm Malcolm X. I'm Malcolm X. I'm Malcolm X. I'm Malcolm X. I am 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 Malcolm X.
I mean, it was cool to see John David Washington with his small little cameo, but it was cool to see like those classroom scenes and then see Nelson Mandela teach, about just like teaching about like, because again, like he's not an American historical figure, but there's so much shared Black experience across these different countries just based off of what happened during that period of time and to where it is now. Because like South Africa was facing a very similar thing. And so to have like sort of that unifying moment and like Malcolm X goes to Mecca. And so like it becomes more of it kind of like transcends being an American story. It kind of becomes more of a sort of a global Black experience story and where he fits into that story. And so it was cool to see it kind of wrap up with Nelson Mandela sort of like lecturing at the end. I thought was cool.
Yeah, I thought if we were the Ringers, the rewatchables, Nelson Mandela would have won my heat check award for the movie. Came in and pitched a few strikeouts and whatever.
With the Mandela thing, though, I thought was so interesting is that he wouldn't say the final line of the quote.
To be respected as a human being in this society, on this earth, in this day, which we intended to bring into existence.
By any means necessary.
And that's how we cut to Malcolm X saying by any means necessary, which I think worked really well. I think it was great for him to cap off, the whole quote thing, but I just also found it kind of interesting that Nelson Mandela's like, I won't say that part. I won't do that. Like, so he'll advocate, he is teaching people about Malcolm, which I think is great, but I think he's also just like, maybe not by any means necessary, maybe there's other ways to go about this, but I think it worked great, with Malcolm saying it. I think that whole end segment was wonderful.
For sure. Any scenes that stuck out to you, Ben, that you wanted to talk about?
I mean, honestly, I can't help but get wrapped up in all the times that he's teaching. I put it in my letterbox, the whole Plymouth Rock landed on us moment, like all of that. It's just hard not to get caught up in it. I feel like my favorite scene from the movie, though, I actually used in our teaser announcement for the podcast itself, and that's the whole they're brothers of Brother Johnson moment where they go to the police station.
Where is he?
Nobody here by that name.
Wait a second. What is your name, fella?
Don't worry about what my name is. 2 witnesses saw Brother Johnson brought in here beat up. Nobody saw him brought out.
You didn't hear the sergeant? Outside.
I suggest you look outside that window.
The cops are saying like, oh, well, you're not his lawyer, so we're not going to tell you. He's like, I suggest you go outside. And Malcolm's like, I suggest you look outside. And they go and look at the window, and just like the street is just lined, with the brothers of Brother Johnson, and they all look up at the same time. And they're able to use I mean, I guess force is the right word, but to use it for good. You know, it's like, let's make sure this guy's getting the care that he deserves.
Yeah.
They see the condition he's in, like, give me an ambulance now. They get the ambulance. The cop's like, okay, great, leave. Like, you got what you wanted. He's like, I am not satisfied. Like, we're going to the hospital. We're going to make sure that he's going to be okay. And I think just like showing it's hard never just to love the symmetry, you know, like people all walking together in unison and doing all that, but it just kind of showed the power of Malcolm and the control, I guess, that he had, you know, to kind of unify around a force for good. So that was probably, you know, if I had to pick one scene, I'd say that was my favorite scene of the movie.
For sure. And then I think it was the policeman said something to the effect of no one man should have that power or something like that, or no man should have that much power. And I thought it was interesting because it, like, the way that the movie is shown, like you see Malcolm's progression, and you see that he's got followers and he's preaching to more and more people, you know, in his churches or in his mosques. But then all of it, like it really drives home the point right there. And I think, you know, obviously they did that intentionally, but because it was as much of a surprise to us as a viewer as it was to the police officers at the station, the fact that this one man had all these people following him. Yeah, just seeing the level of control he had and the discipline in the group, and just the power that he had. I thought it was sort of a wake up call for me as the viewer. Like, oh, okay, now he is now the Malcolm X that I thought I knew.
Yeah, and
it was the first time I think that, at least in the movie, that white America was like, oh shit, like here comes the reckoning.
Yeah,
because there's a part of me that you can't, like, for as prevalent as racism still is in our society, that I like, it's hard for me to believe that people don't know what they're doing is shitty and wrong. Like, you know what I mean? So it's like, to me, it was just like the first time it's like, shit. Like the other shoe's finally dropping here. Like, we're in trouble. And I thought that was definitely a scene that stood out to me. I have it on my notes here. Another scene that wasn't my favorite scene, but it was one that probably my runner-up was one of his speeches over the B-roll of, the Ku Klux Klan and the civil rights violence and all that. It's funny that this isn't my favorite scene because I was like floored by it, you know, just seeing that footage. You know, we've seen it before, but just the way it was presented and the words and like the delivery from Denzel.
100 years ago, they used to put on white sheets and sick bloodhounds on us. Well, nowadays they've traded in the sheets. Well, some of them have traded in the sheets. They've traded in the sheets. Please. They've traded in those white sheets for police uniforms. They traded in the bloodhounds for police dogs. And just like that old Uncle Tom back during slavery time, tried to teach you and I to stop you and I from resisting the Ku Klux Klan or resisting by teaching us to love our enemy and to pray for those who use us spitefully. You got these chicken-pecking Uncle Tom so-called Negro leaders today.
But isn't it a great day?
You've got these Uncle Tom Negro leaders today that are telling us we ought to pray for our enemy. We ought to love our enemy. We ought to integrate with an enemy who bombs us, who kills and shoots us, who lynches us, who rapes our women and children. No, that's not intelligent. That's not intelligent.
Everything about it, I was transfixed, and I thought it was beautiful is maybe not the right word, but engaging, to say that at the very least. That was another one that stuck out for me. But for me, my favorite scene, and the one that really left me, and it's a testament directly to Denzel and his ability as an actor, was the Russian roulette scene when they're setting up their first heist.
She loves me. She loves me nuts. She loves me. She loves me nuts.
Even though I knew nothing was going to happen as far as like the gun actually being fired.
Yeah.
I was like, from that moment on in the movie, I was like, all right, I'm in.
Yeah, like, for sure.
I'll flip first, Rudy.
Red, cool it. Come on, baby.
Head man in charge, right?
Put the gun down.
All right, we believe you. We believe you. Red, stop clowning around, all right? For Christ's sakes.
Your turn, Rudy.
The confidence and the control and the power displayed with that one little scene. I mean, he's got a gun. It's easy to seem powerful when you're the only one with a gun in the room. But the way he used it, or didn't use it, as it turns out, was just, it was written really well, and it was acted incredibly. And to me, like, the only note I made was just holy shit, because I was like, I knew logically that Malcolm wasn't going to get shot. Like, probably no one else was going to get shot.
Yeah.
And just the tense, like how tense it was. And the way it ended up with this charming smile, like, oh, I had it palmed the whole time. It was fine. It was like, okay, I get it. You can see not only how good of an actor that Denzel is, but it to me, it showed, like, it was a good representation of how a person like that could come into power, because from that point on, watching him speak and hearing him speak and everything he said, I was kind of like, yeah, you're right. White people do fucking suck. Like, I am an asshole. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I was really like, no matter where he was in the movie, I really felt like I was on his side. And I just thought it started for me at that moment. It really jumped out to me.
That Russian roulette scene, it's funny that you mentioned, like, that you could predict that nothing was going to happen to him and that probably things weren't going to happen to other people. But, like, as someone who thought that Malcolm X was like this violent dude, like, I actually didn't know if something was going to happen. So, like, I'm watching this, I'm like, is this the part? Like, and also, like, with that hospital scene with like with them all lined up, like, is there going to be some type of violent thing that happens? Like, I was surprised as the movie went on that, like, there really wasn't a ton of violence. I know that, like, his words led to, like, some uprisings and some violence, but, like, that he personally didn't really participate in any of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think it's even the fact that, I mean, the stuff he is saying is incendiary, right? But when you really, and part of the best part about this movie to me was the fact that you really get to understand what he's saying and why he's saying it. And in that speech over the civil rights violence footage, I think the end of that scene ends with the words,
"He's not teaching us to hate the white man. He's teaching us to love ourselves."
All right. And I think, like, that message, when you only look at the surface level of someone that's very angry and is saying things that might scare you as the opposition, I guess, for lack of a better word, when you really get down and look at what he's trying to say, I mean, he's saying it in a way that is, like, forceful, and it's you know, it has meaning and power behind it. But in the end, that's really all he's trying to do. Is he's trying to teach black people to think about themselves differently. Don't think about themselves in the way that they think white people want them to think about themselves. Like, really think about themselves. And I can't say it enough. That's my favorite part about this movie.
Yeah, he talks about that a lot with having the slave mind. You know, like when is it Smokey? Is that Spike Lee's character? Is that his name, or Shorty?
Oh, Shorty.
Yeah. But, like, when he comes, like, while he's speaking, and he's like, "Oh, Shorty, is that you?" And he goes back and he sees him. He's like,
"Shorty, is that you, brother? Praise be to Allah." Now, this is exactly what I'm talking about, the slave mentality, the slave mind. This brother and I, we had the slave mind. We used to rob together. We used to sleep with white women. We went to prison together. Now, don't be surprised when I say we went to prison, because some of y'all still in prison right now. Prisons of your mind.
You know, he's got the slave mind. He's like, but honestly, a lot of us still do, and that's what we're trying to get away from.
Come on, brother, give me a hug. Yeah. That's all right, brother. That's all right. Look, he still got his hair fried. That's all right, though. That's the slave mind. That's the slave mind.
Yeah, it's just a very impassioned speech, not necessarily like hate speech, you know, just like trying to get across the message.
Right. Speaking of the slave mind, something they talk about is why Malcolm chose to change his last name to X. to get rid of the name that he was, his slave ancestors were given. And I didn't even think about this until just now, but Alex and I were talking about this. She was reading about that very topic. We weren't even talking about Malcolm X. She just happened to be reading about this, how like black people in America got their last names. And I think it's interesting how the person that played Malcolm X is his last name is Washington, which is there was Washington, Jackson, Jefferson. Those are three of the biggest, three of the most widely given names to the slaves. And that irony just hit me. And I think that's kind of interesting.
And again, it's just more stuff that we're not taught in school. We got to find out through a movie later on. But yeah, that stuff was, that was very, very interesting.
For sure. Speaking of interesting stuff, I asked you guys to pick out some trivia pieces about the movie that you might want to talk about or share. So, Benjamin, why don't you share a piece of trivia that you liked and we can talk about that?
Man, I don't even know how to narrow it down, honestly.
Sure.
Like there's so much about this movie.
Yeah, I've got 4 that I picked out, but you could almost throw a dart at IMDb and hit a piece.
I think one of probably the most interesting out of all of them for me, and Matt kind of talked a little bit about it earlier, is that this is the only movie that has not a documentary that's been given permission to film in Mecca. The only narrative film ever in history. And I just think it's amazing that they, like, even whoever, I don't know who gives the permissions for that, but whoever it was understood the importance of this film and what showing it meant.
Wearing the ihram garb, I made my 7 circuits around the Kaaba. I drank from the well of Zemzem. I prayed to Allah from Mount Arafat. It was the only time in my life that I stood before the creator of all and felt like a complete human being.
And I just still, like, to this day, I'm like, wow, that's crazy that, they're able to do that. And just to kind of piggyback on that fact that, like, they weren't given all the money that they needed initially. And the producers told them, like, to make the Egypt scenes and the Mecca scenes to film them on the shores of New Jersey. It's like, this is an not awful movie, but, like, you can't do that to this film. That's insane to, like, try to think about that. So that's another trivia piece I can get into after we kind of, like, take our turns. But I just think the fact that this was the only one that's been able to film in Mecca was just astounding and so appropriate.
For sure. When I watching the movie, that trivia stood out to me because I thought, oh, that's archival footage that they got somehow. Because I remember I had watched some documentary. It was like a Vice travel documentary or something where a guy snuck his camera in. He did the trek to. He's a Muslim dude, and he took his camera with him on the trek to Mecca or whatever. And they talked a lot about how you can't film in there. And it was a big deal that they had gotten this footage. So I was like, oh, cool. They got some archival footage and then they built a set to make it look the same. But I think it's pretty incredible they were able to do that. And, they picked the right movie, I think, to allow because, it's definitely stood the test of time.
Yeah.
What about you, Matt? Any trivia you wanted to share?
I mean, I had written that one down as a highlight as well, just because, it's insane. And I was trying to remember, did they film Denzel in Mecca or did they just have footage of Mecca? Because
I believe they do.
They do both.
Okay.
They showed Denzel at I think it's not the Wailing Wall. What's the black cube that you have to touch? Gosh, I can't remember the name of it, but they show him there. And then they have like a couple wide shots of that. Like you circle that square monolith and then you have to go touch it. They showed him there, and then at the end of the movie, maybe it wasn't Mecca, but they showed actual footage of Malcolm X riding the camel towards the pyramids.
Right.
So maybe they don't show Mecca, but
because I was wondering about that, because apparently, like, along with that trivia fact, like, they needed a separate, like, all Muslim crew to, like, go and do it because apparently they didn't want any, like, other outside people there. But then I think Denzel's like a devout Christian, so I was curious about how that worked out. But maybe it didn't matter. Maybe they got the permission.
I mean, it was a piece of trivia I didn't plan on sharing, but I read one where Denzel knew which glasses Malcolm was wearing at any point during his speeches. So maybe they felt he was method enough that
Yeah,
they could
at least he knows enough about it.
And yeah, not to step on whatever you're about to share, but I think maybe part of it too is that you guys, this may have also been in the trivia, but for a year he prepped beforehand. He didn't take any other roles or anything, so he gave up the pork, and I don't know if he converted to, Islam or just like studied it very well, but I wonder if that's also kind of like what they were like, okay, you at least appreciate and respect what's going on here. That definitely could have led into it.
For sure. That doesn't really step on what I wanted to talk about. The one piece of trivia that I picked out, and it's more so just a commentary on the connectivity of Hollywood and whatever, because like if you see, anytime I've seen a movie or an actor and you're like, whoa, where did that guy come from, or where did that girl come from, or who's this director? It's like you can look back and be like, oh no, they came from here, and here's what it's never as random as you think. And I just thought it was interesting that Spike and Oliver Stone were both film students at NYU, and Martin Scorsese was their film professor.
Yeah.
And at one point, I think Stone, like Oliver Stone had been like offered the movie and he was considering it. And I just like the level of, you think that these guys come out of nowhere. It's like, oh no, he was learning with Oliver Stone from Martin Scorsese. Like,
who else was in their class? Ang Lee.
Oh, really?
Oh, wow. Yeah. And like Spike Lee, like he never spoke to anybody but him and Ernest Dickerson, who went on to become like his cinematographer for all these films we've been talking about. But yeah, they were all in class together. I think that's insane. Like, what a class to be in.
Yeah. It's like, you think like, oh, all I had to do was go to NYU. Right. But it's like, no, it's just, obviously their talent level is how they've gotten to where they are, but it's just like, the level of connectivity has always been
for sure
interesting to me.
Did you get to share yours, Matt, or did I step on it? I don't remember.
No. I just kind of piggybacked off of yours.
Oh, okay. All right. Sorry. Yeah.
I thought it was interesting. They weren't going to let him use Malcolm X's actual speeches in the film, which, I mean, I think we talked for a few minutes about how his actual speech over the footage was probably one of the best parts of the movie, in my opinion. And like without it, I mean, Spike said that it would be like making an Elvis movie without Elvis songs, and it's 100% true. It just wouldn't have worked. I'm glad that they were able to get the rights to it, or maybe they just did it. I don't know how they ended up on that, but I think at this point, we could probably dive into Rushmore Mountain. We can talk about Denzel.
These are OR scrubs.
Oh, are they?
For me, the movie itself, I felt, and I think I felt a little bit different than you guys. To me, it was less about Malcolm X. Like, Malcolm X was sort of like the proxy or the eyes through which we learn about what it's like to be a black person in America.
Yeah.
And he was the lens that we saw it through. Because that's what that's what I was left with, was more about the overall picture versus like just the story of Malcolm X. But despite that, like, the other thing I'm left with was just how goddamn incredible Denzel Washington was in this movie.
So good.
And like, I think I said it before, but I was like, I'm all in. Like, yes, whatever you say, like, you're right. Like, I follow you. And not only, it was Malcolm X's words, but I truly felt like Denzel was about as close as you could get to being actually Malcolm on screen. So without further ado, we can jump into our Rushmore Mountain for Denzel Washington. And Ben, why don't you go first? Give us your picks.
So yeah, mine are just going off my personal favorites with Denzel, which I guess they all are with Rushmore Mountains, but this one just solidified its spot instantly after I watched it. I was like, oh, this is one of the best performances I've ever seen on film all time. Like, it's fantastic. He's he's great, and he got game. I think that's just another great him, and Spike collaboration. It's a wonderful film. Training Day is he's so powerful in that. Like he's so intimidating in that movie, and I think it's just fantastic. Like he's I don't know, he's just wonderful in that.
For me, sorry,
no, you're good.
The Russian roulette scene, I was like, this is the scene that they knew he could do Training Day.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Like
100%.
The charisma, the charm, and like the sheer like power, and anyways.
Yeah, I wanted him in the Malcolm get up just to start yelling like King Kong. He got nothing on me. This is like, oh my gosh, it's so good. And this is it's a personal, like probably my favorite Denzel movie of all time, and that's Man on Fire.
¿Puedes oírme?
Me duele la cabeza.
Voy a hacerte unas preguntas. Si no me dices toda la verdad, vas a sufrir mucho más de lo necesario. Voy a cortarte los dedos. Uno por uno. Me obligas. Y eso es para que no sangres. ¿Ok? Ahora.
No mames. ¿Sabes quién soy yo? You know who I am? Hey.
Like I love that movie so much, and I would just be so upset if I didn't put my little Creasy Bear on there. So yeah, Man on Fire makes it for me.
Perfect. Any honorable mentions?
I probably should have had some written down, but I committed to my 4. I had a list of other ones, so I'm like, I gotta get my 4. So
cool. All right, Matt, hit us.
Oh yeah, Malcolm X has got to be. I mean, this I said this in my Letterboxd review. This is where I actually get to see him like be someone else that isn't Denzel, and I couldn't believe like what I was seeing because I'd never seen him just transform into a role the way that he did. But some others that I really like that would make the Mount Rushmore is Remember the Titans, you know?
Yep. I do remember the Titans.
Do you remember them?
Always remember. Glory. The thing is, we brought up Glory, and I think that one thing that sets this apart, Malcolm X apart from Glory, is that like Malcolm X was a very distinct individual, and we knew a lot about like his mannerisms. Like there was enough there for Denzel to take from and convey. Whereas the role that he played in Glory, I'm not sure how much detail we know about that character.
Mm-hmm.
And so even though he did a great job, because he always does a great job, but like it was still Denzel, you know, doing his best to be that character. And then I got to throw on American Gangster.
I need these fresh, because if I come back here and get you, you know what it is.
Tango.
Don't play that.
Yes, sir. I hear you. You won't have to come back. There will be no problem. What about you, Frank? You need anything?
Where's my money? Red Top gave you the package. You're supposed to be handing me my money. Here's a jar right here, 20%.
Oh, you got the jar?
That's right.
Get the fuck out of here, Frank. Oh, what you gonna do? What the fuck you gonna do, Frank? Huh? What you doing? You gonna shoot me in front of everybody? Huh? Come on.
Yeah. That movie ruled. And I haven't seen Man on Fire, and for those of you listening, it's on our list coming up here. So
Indeed.
We'll do an episode on it. I'm excited to watch it.
You should be, because it's also on my Rushmore mountain. And I'm glad you went second, Matt, because mine mirrors Ben's exactly.
Is it really?
Yeah.
Nice.
And there's actually more variance to this because of you, Matt, than I thought there was. I thought ours, all three were going to be exactly the same, maybe with one or two differences.
Yeah.
I thought about putting Remember the Titans on there, but when I made my list, I just had to go with gut. Like, when I think of Denzel, these are the movies that I think of. And actually, the first one I think of is Man on Fire. So I'm super excited for you to see that, Matt, and always to talk about it. The next one is Training Day.
King Kong ain't got shit on me!
I think that was the first time I really understood how great of an actor Denzel was. I mean, I always thought he was good. I liked him and everything. But yeah, that really just drove it home. And then He Got Game is the only Spike movie that I had seen previous to this Spike Lee round. So I loved him in that. And
Nice.
the scene where they're playing one-on-one at the end, like,
Oh yeah,
that's one of my favorite scenes in any movie. So it had to be on there for me. And then obviously Malcolm X. Like, if there's a list out there that doesn't have Malcolm X on it, like, we need to talk to that person, because I don't know how that could be the case.
Guys, I'm going to out myself as a total Denzel poser, but I've seen none of the other movies on your guys' Mount Rushmore.
Oh,
Really?
Interesting.
And it's funny you say that, because that's honestly when I was making my Rushmore Mountain, I was like, oh, I haven't seen as many Denzels as I probably should have. Like, I think if I had seen it, it's quite possible that like Philadelphia ends up on here. I just haven't seen it. You know, like I'm sure it's an insanely strong performance. I just haven't watched it. Like, there's a lot.
Right.
I mean, I'm gonna out myself as someone, I don't know how, I'm fine not seeing it, but I've never seen Remember the Titans. So that just didn't even wasn't even a possibility for me. I do think after hearing Matt's, my honorable mention would be American Gangster. If nothing else, because it's like one of two movies that I like Russell Crowe in. And I was like, yeah, you know what? I think I attribute a lot of that to Denzel. And the other movie, I attribute a lot of it to Ryan Gosling for Nice Guys. Like, I think maybe I still just don't like Russell Crowe. I just like his co-stars. I don't know. But yeah, I think American Gangster would probably take my honorable mention.
Yeah, I think so too. I thought about Flight. But to me, I was just like, I only liked that movie because of Denzel. Other than that, I didn't really care about it, which I guess is a good reason to put it on the mountain. But I don't know.
I felt that way about The Equalizer. Like, I think he's great in that movie, but I just think the better version of that story is Man on Fire. You know, and you get like Tony Scott's crazy direction and colors and all that kind of stuff. Like,
for sure,
I love Man on Fire. I'm very excited to hear what Matt has to say about it.
Yeah, me too. And I'm excited to watch it again. Any excuse.
I can't wait. Yeah.
Well, I think we've talked about everything that I wanted to talk about. If there's anything that you guys wanted to touch on or anything else, by all means, take the reins.
The one piece of trivia that I didn't mention that I think is, I mean, I don't even know how to explain its significance. Just like, it's crazy that they lined up this way. But the first time that Spike Lee showed this movie to, I believe Warner Brothers had it first. I think they probably are the ones that pushed it out too. But the first screening of the movie happened on the day that the cops in the Rodney King trial were acquitted. So the LA riots started the day that they saw Malcolm X for the first time. And it was a 4-hour plus cut. So I just can't imagine going into that movie. I don't know like how it worked, if it was like during the movie they got acquitted or beforehand, but just to have LA literally on fire on the same day that you're watching this movie. And I'm fairly positive that everyone in there was a white person. If it was all Warner Brothers executives, you know, just like sitting there watching Malcolm X and they come out and LA is on fire. It's like, yeah, this is a very relevant film. If you don't think so, just go look at all the smoke out there. You know, I just like, I cannot believe how those like coincided to be on the same day. Like, it's not a good thing by any means, but just like what are the chances that that's how that happened? So I think that was like just insane. And then with it being a 4-hour cut, they told Spike to get it down to 2 hours. And speaking of Oliver Stone, they were doing JFK at the same time, and he called Oliver Stone. He's like, "Wait, how long is JFK?" He's like, 3 hours. Like, okay, cool. I'm gonna give it 3 hours then. Like, there's no way that like Malcolm X deserves less of a story than JFK, so I'll give him a 3-hour cut. So
I know they're getting ready to release JFK. So I say, how long is JFK? It says like 2 hours. But they don't know I know Oliver Stone. Yeah. So I call Oliver. How long is JFK? Spike is 3 hours. Don't tell him that. See, directors, you know, they look out for each other.
Yeah, I don't know. That there's, you know, we could keep going on and on, but I think the LA riots was a huge thing.
That was the crazy part to me. I hate to just gloss over Rodney King and the LA riots and talk about runtime, but like it didn't, I don't know how, like I definitely watched it in chunks. I think you guys mentioned how you watched it over a couple different nights, but I watched it all in one day, just in chunks.
Yeah.
And even though it took up the majority of the day and it, you know, took 4 hours to watch it, in a weird way, it didn't seem like it was that long. I know that it is an oxymoron and it sounds counterintuitive, but the whole I didn't feel like there was a moment wasted, really. Like even the part of the beginning where it's just sort of like more frivolous and they're just kind of bouncing around Harlem and you're just kind of meeting everyone. I didn't feel like there was anything wasted, and I didn't feel like there was anything that you could cut, really. And in fact, I really wanted to see more, which speaks to a miniseries like we talked about earlier. But I can't imagine it being any shorter than it was, really.
Yeah.
Well, on that note, if you're out there watching, if you're out there listening, we thank you. Honestly, like we have a blast doing this. It's super fun to put these things together and work on it and try to put out something that we hope people enjoy. So if that's you, thank you. If not, we'll work a little bit harder. Feel free to leave some reviews or reach out to us directly. Hit us in the DMs on Instagram or Facebook or whatever. We want to know what's working. We want to know what's not working. We want to get better at this, and we want to make sure it's something that our listeners and our watchers actually enjoy. So on that note, I'll sign off, and thank you.
Hooah!